My YouTube analytics say that none of you are younger than 13, which means it's safe to assume that we've all experienced a little disappointment in our lives.
Why'd you leave me, Daddy?
That's why today I thought we'd all come together and talk about a particularly solid disappointment. The Last of Us. Not just the show, not just the game, but the elements which took a truly beautiful and emotional story and transformed it into a less than stunning story about revenge, the cyclical nature of violence, and an explanation as to why I'm terrified of female golfers. For the storytellers in the group, we're going to look at 4 pitfalls The Last of Us makes, either by comparing the series to the game, or comparing Part 2 of the general story to Part 1. These mistakes are super easy to make and can work in some instances, but for the show and second game...
Not a great plan.
So with that, let's tee up and take a 9-iron straight to point number 1 and tee off on this nightmare.
Got everything you hoped for?
Jury's still out.
I think the most common thing I come across in storytelling advice is that you need to hook your audience quick, and in today's age of blinking lights, screaming notifications, and endless bots asking you to sign up for their OnlyFans, this translates into explosions, sexcapades, and murder within the first, 11 seconds. Think of it like storytelling for meth addicts. Now look, there's a time and place for Jason Statham movies, but if you want to tell a story with emotional depth, the kind where your audience is strapped in and holding back tears 5 minutes in, you need some subtlety and a little patience. Let's talk about the original beginning for The Last of Us Part 1. There are no clickers, flamethrowers, revenge plots, or love scenes. Just a single dad, a tired daughter, and a quiet moment on the couch with some funny banter that shows us that these two love each other. It's a normal end to a normal day, with the exception that it's Joel's birthday, and Sarah gives him one of the few good symbols in literature as a present. We get maybe 10 minutes of normalcy before the world collapses, but it's enough. The dialogue is casual, the pacing is slow, the camera doesn't feel like it's trying to impress anybody, and I've spent more time with Joel at this point than I've spent with my real dad. It's just real life, where we as audience members can identify with the humanity of this father-daughter relationship, and it lasts long enough so that we have $1 in the emotional piggy bank. These two have one another. That's pretty much it. And that's enough for both of them. Now, Season 1 of the show doesn't make me that mad. We get a prologue which doesn't add or take away from the story, but it does waste time. Storytelling in a game or book has nearly unlimited time, but in a show or movie, it's a valuable commodity. Think of it like speed dating or your Tinder bio. You don't have 3 minutes to waste because I've already swiped right on 25 bot accounts by then and have a date with Katarina. In the show version, we get a lot of extra time with Sarah, which, again, doesn't make or break anything. It just sucks up time that the game demonstrated was not necessary. As writers, what you want to develop is a feel for optimizing time with a character and emotional attachments. Do they say something smart or funny?
Where did you get the money for this?
Drugs. I sell hardcore drugs.
Oh, good. You started helping out with the mortgage then.
Are they loved by another character? Can your audience see themselves in that character? Each one of these tiny points gives your character, I don't know, a tiny cookie or a gold star, whatever you want to think about. Once you have established a few gold stars, once you feel like a random person on the street would say, "Sign me up, I want to know more about Sarah," your story can proceed with the life-threatening explosions. Now, for the real kick to the cojones, let's compare Part 1 to Part 2. In the second game, we get a well-done recap between Tommy and Joel. Some hints that Ellie and Joel's relationship has changed, but they still care for one another. And finally, get a guitar for a new symbol in the father-daughter dynamic they share. All well done, and this is where the story should start. But it doesn't. The initial problem I had with the game as well as the show has to do with setup and pacing. There's been a 7-year gap between the games, a 2-year gap between the seasons, and our reintroduction to Joel and Ellie once the story gets rolling revolves around small-town drama and low stakes, which take forever to manifest into anything consequential. It's like waiting in line at the DMV, only to discover after 3 hours that you're in line for the bathroom, and that the stall has been taken up by a traffic cone, and the bathroom actually leads to hell. So I guess it's really just another day at the DMV. The main driver of suspense and tension in the episode comes from Abby promising to kill Joel slowly in 5 years' time, which, if the story played true to who Joel and Tommy are, is the dramatic equivalent of putting a water gun on the desk while opening a savings account at your local bank. Nobody is scared, but the 80-year-old security guard still keeps an eye on you because his dementia is really aggressive today. I mean, honestly, who, after watching Season 1 or playing the game, felt threatened by Disney's Lost Boys? There's no crushing pressure that things are going wrong or that anything is immediately at risk, which, when you only have 9 episodes, is a pretty big chunk of time spent not establishing meaningful emotional investment between your story's character. While you don't need a story to start with explosions or overwhelming stakes, you need something that is a high stake for your character that matches your audience's expectations. Whether that means actively knowing the conflict between Joel and Ellie, people in town learning Ellie is immune, or some other point of tension which has carried over from the previous game or season. We need that investment to tee up the bogey for point number 2.
I shot the hell out of that guy, huh?
If part 1 of The Last of Us taught us anything, it's that great relationships aren't built on similarity, they're built on contrast. My body doesn't register a hangover day after day after day after months, but it would notice a day of sobriety like a freight train to a daycare. We need to set up this contrast in our characters to create the most emotional tension in a story, and it's something Part 1 excelled at in the game and did fairly well with during the show. Joel is Destiny's Child, a survivor that pops off kneecaps and hasn't felt a good emotion in 20 years. 20 years! His guilt is almost old enough to drink when he gets paired up with a hopeful, bright-eyed girl who hasn't been calloused by how dark the world is around her. If you're very new to storytelling, you might think this is a water and oil situation where the two characters have nothing in common and they'll never mix. And you're right, they shouldn't mix, get along, or make each other's lives easier. But they do, because they have one thing in common, a goal that makes them overcome these differences, grow together, and help one another overcome what has been holding them back at the story's onset. Bridging this gap is what makes up the center of your story. If there is no gap between your characters, then there's no tension in your story. If there's no tension, then your story is drier than that love scene in Part 2 and the entire 7-episode slog that occurs after Joel's golf game. Whether it was the show or the game, Part 2 of The Last of Us drags along more painfully than my naked biscuits over glass at that office New Year's party. But why? It really shouldn't. I want revenge just as much as Ellie does. We make meaningful progress going through her hit list. This should feel just like God of War 3 or Blue Eye Samurai, where each slit to the jugular is another splash of gas on my rageometer. But instead, it feels like my back hurts while I'm bored at my niece's dance recital as she flails and clobbers her way through a drunkenly choreographed jazz number. Again. Come on, Samantha, get it together. There is plenty of external conflict, but not a whole lot of internal and interpersonal conflict. This is more frustrating than chafed thunder thighs at the world's saltiest beach because while the story had a potentially phenomenal opportunity to create character conflict between Dina and Ellie, they sideline Dina as a baby oven for the rest of the story and take away a large part of what made the first game and season so great. Dina isn't around to add physical stakes to the game. Sure, that's a party foul, but also, she isn't around to see the horrible things that Ellie is doing for revenge. One of the big tropes of a revenge story is the gradual erosion of humanity in the story's protagonist, or, in English, getting the audience to slowly feel like the hero has gone too far. If Dina were around to see what we see as audience members, she could be horrified for us. She could slowly start hating Ellie, and then their love story would actually have some solid significance in the story, rather than a checkbox for a romantic side story. The second season fumbles this relationship because, while Ellie and Dina are together, they are effectively in sync, and when they might be at moral odds with one another, they are separated. This is doubly frustrating when we see that the storytellers did the exact same thing with Ellie and Joel.
You lied to me. You looked me in the eyes, and you lied, and it was the same face.
When The Last of Us Part 1 gets rolling, we have two major emotional forces at play: regret and tension. Joel regrets the death of his daughter, and there is tension in the emotional distance he keeps between himself and Ellie as a consequence. We as audience members understand that tension. We can feel it. There is no mystery as to why Joel is afraid to form a relationship with his surrogate daughter, and that fear follows us around from city to city like a crazy ex-girlfriend. You can do this in any story by giving your hero both something to run away from and something to run towards. It's a double motivation which, when done well, compounds the emotional stakes. To do this well, have your hero's fear, what they're running from, stand in the way of what they need to succeed. So, for Joel, this is the need to open himself up to loving a daughter again so that he makes the right choice at the end of the game. For me, this would be something like swimming past a shark to get into a boat and sail to safety. You need to overcome the fear to accomplish the story mission. When we compare this dynamic to Part 2 of the story, we are literally given none of this. There is tension between Ellie and Joel, but we never know why there is tension while Joel is, alive. We have some obvious suspicions, but can't be sure. Now look, if I wanted to watch two adults fight each other while having no clue what was going on, then I could just relive my parents' divorce hearing. Watching conflict without knowing the reason is not experiencing a story, it's just annoying. By the time we learn why Ellie and Joel were fighting, it's the 18th hole, and it doesn't matter because Joel is a divot in the grain, in essence killing all potential tension between these characters. Because you can't have active tension between characters when one of them is dead. What we are left with is Ellie's regret, but not the same sort of regret where Ellie could somehow make things right by facing her fears, seeking out some evil people at the cost of her soul, and creating an ironic twist where humanity's only hope for a cure becomes its biggest threat. It's the normal kind of regret that we all have when people die and there's nothing left to do except feel like crap for the rest of your life. The same goes for Abby's half of the story. The show does a better job than the game in setting up her motivation. Unlike the game, where we don't even know who these kids are until something crazy like 6 hours into the story, the show at least makes us understand that she is motivated by revenge and the loss of a loved one. We need that. As storytellers and audience members, we need to know why a villain wants to go clubbing with our assumed protagonist. Otherwise, we just hate them flat out. Oh, you want to kill the closest thing I have to a father figure? Fat chance I'm even gonna like this ragtag Goonie squad. This is because the initial sentiment your audience has about a character is nearly impossible to change. When Abby is introduced as Joel's murderer, the guy we all tuned in to watch, there's no salvaging her. Like Ellie and Joel's relationship tension, there is no tension in Abby's character, her decisions, her friendships, or how the audience feels about her, because all of the potential growth, conflict, and struggle dies with Joel Miller. She has done something irredeemable, and the audience, with absolutely no investment in her as a character, is forced to ask themselves, can Abby be redeemed, or is there anything else on HBO that I would rather watch? In all three character instances, because the story was structured like an epileptic dream catcher, the characters are motivated, but they aren't complicated. There's no conflict between Ellie and Joel's deteriorated relationship because they never have to work together. There's no conflict in Abby seeking revenge against Joel because she doesn't know him, and we don't like her, so she's just a bad guy. There's no conflict in Ellie's quest for revenge because even when she pops a pregnant lady, where is the emotional turmoil where we stop and say, oh no, I had a reason to care about these other characters? It's not there because the storytellers try to get this emotional attachment retroactively. And that brings me to my last point, which is normally my first point, which is that character is why we care. But more specifically, show your audience which characters they are supposed to care about. With part 1 of the story and game, we know that we're following Joel's story, which I guess makes us bad people for assuming we would spend much, if any, time at all with Joel in the second part of the story, because it's Ellie's time to shine, you bigot! But that's okay. I think we all love Ellie, even when she is being a butthole and a half to Joel for saving her life without permission. How dare you? And since the storytellers needed to make sure we didn't get too distracted with Joel's toxic masculinity, they take him on the PGA Tour and leave 25% of the audience wondering why they would even keep watching. You see, guys, once your audience has emotionally invested in the hero, you are going to have one hell of a time cutting them out of the manuscript because you are breaking a promise. Are we ever promised that Joel will survive The Last of Us? No. Do we assume the sequel to his story would have him in it?
You sick monster!
Now look, I'm not going to pretend Game of Thrones killing off Ned Stark didn't get the same wow points, but Ned wasn't half of the cast either. When he died, there were multiple other characters capable of carrying their weight, plus his corpse. But when you splink 50% of your characters who matter in the first 10 seconds of a story, you send it into a death spiral without an anchor. But everyone here knows better than to hit the assumed lead into a sand trap, so it isn't a lesson I need to drive home. Instead, I want to focus on the latter 6/7 of the story where we split our attention between Abby and Ellie. Naughty Dog should have known that their audience was comprised of 95% males with ADHD from back in the good old days of Ritalin and lithium, so the last thing they needed to do is help divide their attention. But, for storytelling in general, this divergent storytelling works in one direction. Your cast of characters start together. We, the writer, establish a reason for liking each character, and then we diverge into separate story threads. I mean, it just makes sense. I have emotional damage. You can't be asking me to love one character, crush his face on the front nine, force me to pivot my focus to a second character, and then take a several-hour tangent in the storyline to try and love someone else. I'm sensitive, damn it. When you move around from one shallow emotional investment to the next, you confuse and upset your audience while simultaneously eroding their trust in you as a storyteller. You're not a divorced dad that can just keep bringing new mommies home over to the house. You need to give your audience stability. Who are they supposed to focus on? Who are they supposed to bond with? Are they supposed to hate or love a character? And yes, of course, you should trick your audience when it comes to character betrayals or reveals, but it needs to dovetail into the main narrative rather than run parallel on its own set of tracks. What do you think this is, Rings of Power? When story threads begin together, then diverge, and ultimately come back together, we get a more gratifying catharsis. The impact of all those emotional endings and emotional attachments colliding amplifies the impact of a story. When you allow those stories to unravel, or expect your audience to take all these separate strings and piece them together, you are asking for a lot of upfront investment. Investment you need to earn, which takes us back to point number 1.
Haven't you heard? There are no more fireflies. They're all gone.
So, where does this leave the rest of us? The Last of Us wasn't ruined because it tried something new. It stumbled because it forgot the basics. Earn our trust, build real conflict, give us tension we can feel, and focus your narrative lens. Great stories don't need perfect characters, they need messy ones, complicated ones, people we ache for, even when they make horrible choices. And that's what made Joel and Ellie unforgettable. And that's what was missing. So, if you're writing your own story, revenge tale or not, don't just chase shock, chase meaning. Give us a reason to care, then make us suffer for it. That's the good kind of pain, the kind we remember, the kind you as a writer earned. If you are a writer and have been struggling with any of these 4 points, leave them down in the comments. We can open up a discussion and figure out suggestions which may help solve your story problem. Check out my first book on Amazon and subscribe to the channel for more brutal golf tips on storytelling. Thanks for watching. Now go write the best story possible.